Why did she linger by the edge of the compound, letting the night swallow her silhouette while everyone else had gone inside? The base was quiet, too quiet, save for the low hum of generators and the distant thump of a helicopter settling behind the ridge. Her uniform hung loosely over her frame, worn at the elbows and knees, each tear and smudge a badge of the mission she had survived. Lieutenant Mara Kessler did not move to join the others. She stood alone, chin tucked slightly, eyes scanning the shadows with the vigilance of someone who had learned early that survival depended on noticing the things no one else saw. Her fingers grazed the stock of her rifle, an extension of herself, cool under the moonlight. She could feel the faint vibrations through the barrel, the heartbeat of the base, the whisper of wind, the subtle shift of sand against concrete. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't afraid of dying. She had stared at death up close too many times to fear it now. No, what haunted her was the thought of failing the people who trusted her, the civilians, her team, the ones who were counting on her judgment to keep them alive. And there was someone else, someone she had promised she would come back for. The briefing had been terse. Intelligence had tracked a high-value target moving through the valley near the eastern ridge. They were to intercept, neutralize, and exfil without leaving a trace. Simple in theory, impossible in execution. Mara had reviewed the satellite feeds, memorized the terrain, and planned every angle, but plans were fragile in war. Plans cracked under the weight of reality, and she had learned that lesson too many times. She took a deep breath, tasting the faint tang of metal in her mouth. Memories she had buried clawed back to the surface. The life she couldn't save because she had hesitated, even for a second. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of diesel and sand. Somewhere in the darkness, a fox barked, sharp and urgent. Mara's heart thudded harder. The silence wasn't empty, it was pregnant, expectant. She adjusted the scope on her rifle, the leather strap of her gloves squeaking softly as her fingers brushed the trigger guard. A faint clatter of boots on gravel drew her attention. Sergeant Dalton emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the dim lights of the base. His face was calm, steady, but she could read the worry in his eyes. "You ready, Mara?" he asked, voice low, measured. Not really a question, more a test. A check to see if she had found the resolve she would need for what lay ahead. She nodded once, brushing dust from her sleeve, but the motion was automatic. Inside, her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that she wasn't ready, that the memory of past failures weighed too heavily tonight, that the thought of losing anyone again made her stomach turn. But she didn't. She never did. The convoy was waiting beyond the perimeter, engines idling softly. Mara followed Dalton's lead, boots crunching over gravel. Each step felt heavier than the last, though outwardly she appeared composed. Inside, she replayed the mission in her mind, every corner, every shadow. There was no room for mistakes, not this time, not when lives depended on her. As they reached the vehicles, a whisper of movement caught her eye, a figure darting behind a stack of crates. Her reflexes sharpened, body tensing instinctively, but it was only a stray dog scuttling back into the darkness. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But the moment lingered, a reminder that in these environments nothing could be taken for granted. Not shadows, not silence, not loyalty. Inside the armored vehicle, the hum of the engine mingled with the quiet murmur of her team. They were competent, disciplined, and mostly silent, each absorbed in their own mental preparation. Mara's eyes drifted to the window. The desert stretched endlessly, a canvas of black and gray, punctuated by the occasional flicker of starlight. Her thoughts wandered to the night before she had enlisted. Her brother had looked up at her, bright-eyed, full of admiration. "You'll come back, won't you?" he had asked. And she had promised. A lie, perhaps, or maybe a vow forged in naivety. Either way, it was a promise she intended to keep. The convoy moved cautiously, hugging the contours of the terrain. Every movement, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. Mara's fingers brushed against the cool metal of her rifle, grounding her. She thought about the last operation, how easy it had been to get distracted by the chaos, the gunfire, the screaming. One wrong decision had cost a life. She would not let that happen again. She couldn't. They reached the staging area near the valley. The moonlight revealed the contours of jagged rocks, the shallow dips where sand had shifted. Her eyes traced every ridge, memorizing every shadow. Dalton gave a barely perceptible nod and the team disembarked, moving with silent precision. Mara's boots sank slightly into the sand, sending tiny puffs into the air. She could feel the anticipation, thick and almost suffocating. She crouched behind a low wall, rifle raised, scanning the horizon. Somewhere a bird called in the night, a lonely, piercing sound that made her flinch for a fraction of a second. She pushed it aside, forcing her focus back to the mission. The target could appear any moment, and when they did, she would have to act. No hesitation, no second guessing. Her mind wandered, though, as it often did in these long stretches of waiting. She remembered the first time she had held a rifle back in training. Hands shaking, heart pounding, yet an unspoken determination burned within her. That day, she had learned that strength was not in the weapon but in the choice to wield it responsibly. She had carried that lesson into every mission, every firefight, every night like this one. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow flitting across the ridge. Mara froze, breath catching. Adrenaline surged, sharpening her senses. Dalton signaled, eyes narrowing. The team tensed. Mara's finger hovered near the trigger, heart pounding in synchrony with the rhythm of the night. And then the figure disappeared behind the rocks. A false alarm, maybe, or maybe a warning. The night stretched on, dragging seconds into minutes, minutes into hours. Mara's body ached from the crouch, from the weight of her gear, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed to stay alert, to watch, to anticipate. She thought of her brother again, picturing him reading by the dim light of a lamp, unaware of the world she navigated each night. She would come back for him. She had to. The first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of pale gold and soft pink. Mara lowered her rifle momentarily, allowing herself a brief respite. The tension that had gripped her all night softened slightly, replaced by a quiet, fragile hope. This was why she endured. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for moments like this, fleeting, fragile, beautiful glimpses of life she fought to protect. Dalton's voice broke the silence, low but firm. "Eyes open, we're moving in." Mara nodded, feeling the familiar surge of focus that only came in the moments before action. She adjusted her scope, took a steadying breath, and let the calm, controlled rhythm of her training take over. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear, only the mission. And somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet voice whispered, a reminder of the promise she had made, the debt she owed to those she loved, to herself. She would see this through, whatever it took, whatever it demanded, because some things mattered more than fear, more than comfort, more than life itself. The team advanced, boots sinking into the warming sand, rifles at the ready, hearts synchronized in purpose. Mara's gaze flicked across the valley, reading every shadow, every subtle movement. She could feel the presence of danger like a low hum beneath the surface. She welcomed it. It kept her alive. It kept everyone alive. And as the first true rays of sunlight touched the ridges, she allowed herself a single thought. Her tears, her fears, her sacrifices had been quiet, unseen. But when the moment came, when the mission demanded everything of her, they would speak louder than any gunfire, and she would act. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and tonight she would prove it once more. Why did the valley feel so empty, yet so alive with danger? Mara crouched behind a low ridge, scanning the terrain with unblinking eyes. Every shadow, every rock, every movement of the desert wind could hide a threat, or a clue. She adjusted her scope, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility pressing against her chest. She wasn't just watching the valley, she was watching for lives she couldn't afford to lose, including her own. Dalton signaled, a flick of his hand, and the team moved forward, silent, controlled. Mara's boots sank slightly into the sand, each step deliberate, measured. Her mind wandered, as it often did before an encounter, tracing the lines of past mistakes. The last mission still haunted her, a civilian family caught in the crossfire because she had hesitated, just for a second. That second had been enough. She had promised herself she would never let that happen again. not under her watch. The valley opened before them like a cruel puzzle. Jagged rocks, shallow dips, and scattered vegetation created endless hiding spots. Mara's pulse quickened. Somewhere out there, the target moved, and with them, the shadows of danger. Her team spread out, rifles raised, communication silent except for the subtle gestures they had trained for. Trust in one another was unspoken but absolute. Mara's thoughts drifted to her brother again. He had been the reason she had joined the service in part. His admiration, his unwavering belief in her, had been a lifeline through the darkest moments of her training. She pictured him in the barracks back home, unaware of the violence and moral compromises she navigated daily. The thought tightened her chest. She couldn't fail him. Not now, not ever. The first sign of movement came as a flicker near a rocky outcrop. Mara froze, her breath shallow. Dalton's hand brushed against her shoulder in a silent check. They had rehearsed this moment countless times. The target could be armed, could be moving with escort, could vanish in an instant. Mara's fingers hovered over the trigger. Patience, precision, control. Her inner voice repeated it like a mantra. Hours stretched as the sun climbed, casting sharp shadows across the valley floor. Sweat dripped under her helmet, stinging her eyes, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Every muscle in her body was coiled, ready to spring. She felt the weight of her choices, the lives she was responsible for, the lives she could not save. And yet she also felt the quiet pride of being part of something larger than herself. That dichotomy always frightened her, the intimacy of fear, the vastness of duty. Then she saw it. A convoy moving slowly along the narrow pass, soldiers flanking a vehicle that glinted in the harsh sunlight. Her pulse accelerated. Dalton motioned for the team to halt. Mara adjusted her scope, eyes narrowing. The intelligence had been accurate, but the terrain had shifted slightly. She had to make a split-second judgment. Her mind raced through possibilities. There was a chance the target would detect them, a chance the operation could go sideways in an instant. But there was also the promise she had made, a promise to protect, to act decisively. The rifle felt like an extension of her resolve. She inhaled, counting silently, steadying her hands. A sudden noise, a rock skittering down a slope, made the team flinch. Mara froze, heart hammering. She scanned the area, adjusting for shadows. Nothing. Probably an animal. But the adrenaline stayed, feeding her focus. Every mission had moments like this, where instinct and calculation danced together, testing the limits of endurance and courage. Dalton whispered a command, subtle but firm. Mara responded, moving into position with the grace of a trained operative. The convoy slowed, unaware of the eyes watching them from the ridge. She noted every detail: number of personnel, their formation, the glint of weapons, the pattern of their movements. Information was power, and power saved lives. Mara's thoughts drifted briefly to the team beside her. Each one carried invisible burdens. She could see it in their eyes: fear, hope, guilt, determination. They were human, vulnerable, and yet unbreakable when they needed to be. She felt a pang of connection, a sense of shared purpose that both comforted and terrified her. Time seemed suspended as she tracked the convoy, calculating angles, estimating distances. The target vehicle veered slightly, bringing it closer to the edge of cover she had prepared. Mara's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from the focus that consumed every fiber of her being. She could feel the rhythm of the desert around her, the whisper of wind, the subtle movement of dust, the distant call of a bird. Every detail mattered. Every detail could save or doom lives. Then the moment came. A vehicle halted near the rocks, the target stepping out briefly. Mara adjusted her scope, finger poised. She could see the humanity in the man, brief, fleeting. Before the mission demanded she view him as a target. Her stomach twisted. Moral clarity in combat was never simple. She had learned that the hard way. But hesitation could cost more than conscience ever would. Dalton's hand on her shoulder, almost imperceptible, reminded her of the team behind her. Their lives depended on her focus, on her decision. Mara exhaled slowly, letting go of fear, letting the discipline of years guide her. Precision, control, resolve. Her heart sank and lifted at once. She realized that this mission wasn't just about the target. It was about proving to herself that she could act without letting the ghosts of past failures paralyze her. Every mission left marks, physical, emotional, moral. Some visible, others buried deep. She carried both, always. The convoy began to move again. Mara's eyes followed, tracking every footstep, every subtle gesture. She knew that the operation would demand more than skill. It would demand endurance, sacrifice, and at some point, the willingness to carry the weight of silence. That burden had been hers before, and it would be hers again. She noticed the younger soldiers flanking the target vehicle. Their nervous movements betrayed inexperience. She made a mental note. Training alone would not protect them from the reality of combat. They were brave, yes, but courage alone wasn't enough. Someone had to guide them. Someone had to bear the weight of responsibility. She was that someone. As the convoy rounded a bend, Mara caught sight of the path she had scouted weeks ago. It offered a sliver of advantage, a chance to intercept without confrontation. She shared the plan with Dalton in a brief whisper. He nodded once, subtle but full of trust. Mara felt the old, familiar rush of focus, a mixture of fear and determination. This was what she was made for. Not recognition, not medals, not glory. This was about protecting lives, hers, her team, and the innocent lives the mission aimed to safeguard. She glanced briefly at the horizon. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley. Light and darkness mingled in the terrain, offering concealment and exposure in equal measure. Mara's thoughts drifted to her brother again, to the promise she had made years ago. She would see this through. No hesitation, no faltering. The wind shifted, carrying faint dust and the smell of heated metal. Mara's stomach tightened with anticipation. Every second counted. Every movement, every decision, every flicker of attention could tip the balance. She allowed herself a single, fleeting reflection. War was rarely about heroism. It was about choices, sacrifice, and the quiet acts that often went unnoticed. Dalton's hand signaled movement. Mara readied herself, eyes narrowing through the scope. The team advanced silently, a fluid unit shaped by trust and necessity. She felt the weight of her role pressing down, but also the strange clarity that only came in these moments of focused tension. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote barked, sharp and sudden. Mara didn't flinch. She let the sound fade into the rhythm of the mission. The world beyond the valley ceased to exist. Only the target, only the team, only the choice she was about to make mattered. And in that suspended moment she realized, her tears, her doubts, her sacrifices, they had always been quiet, unseen. But tonight, every silent act, every careful decision, every heartbeat of restraint would speak louder than gunfire. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest battles were not against enemies, but against the weight of oneself. And Mara was ready. Why did her hands tremble despite years of training? Mara crouched behind the ridge, heart thrumming, eyes locked on the target's convoy as it threaded its way through the valley. Every movement counted. Every heartbeat was measured against the clock, the terrain, the unpredictable chaos of human error. She could see the way the sun glinted off the edges of rifles, how the soldiers flanked their leader, their focus rigid but anxious. A slight misstep, a single glance the wrong way, and everything could collapse. Her mind, however, wandered, not to the danger, not to the mission, but to him, her brother. She had promised him she would return. He didn't understand the weight of that promise, how it twisted inside her chest like a living thing, demanding vigilance, demanding sacrifice. She swallowed, tasting the dryness in her throat, but forced herself to focus. She couldn't afford distraction, not yet, not now. Dalton shifted beside her, silent. The gesture spoke volumes, trust, warning, reassurance. Mara adjusted her scope, peering through the crosshairs. The convoy paused at a narrow pass where the rocks formed natural cover for anyone daring enough to hide. Mara's stomach clenched. She had seen this before: ambushes, traps, mistakes that led to the sound of gunfire and the smell of blood. Memories of past missions flashed. The wail of someone she couldn't save, the futile grasping at hands slipping from hers, the quiet aftermath when nothing remained but regret. She shook it off, forcing her mind into clarity, observation, precision, discipline. The sniper's creed, she reminded herself. She had lived by it. Every decision, every aim, every second of stillness could be the difference between life and death. Movement, a slight shift in the convoy, subtle but enough to catch her attention. Mara's breath caught, pulse quickening. Dalton signaled, eyes flicking toward a rocky outcrop. The team mirrored the motion, a silent choreography honed over months, years. Mara's finger hovered near the trigger. She saw the tension in the soldiers' hands, the tightness in their shoulders. They were not invincible, they were human, and that made her responsibility heavier. She remembered a night years ago in basic training. Rain pounding on the tent, her teeth chattering, and a fellow recruit whispering, "You think you can do this?" Her response had been silent determination, a promise to herself. That same resolve coursed through her now, tempered by experience, sharpened by loss. She could not fail, not here, not when so much depended on her. A sudden rustle in the rocks, a hint of movement outside the convoy's path. Mara froze. Adrenaline surged, sharpening her senses. Dalton's hand brushed her subtly, a reminder, a check, a silent reassurance. She exhaled slowly. The team's safety, the civilians depending on this mission, even the faint hope of keeping her promise to her brother, all depended on measured action, not panic. The sun climbed higher, washing the valley in harsh light. Shadows shortened. There was no hiding in plain daylight. Mara's mind raced through options. The terrain offered vantage points, natural cover, but also potential exposure. Calculations ran through her head: distance, wind, angle, timing. One mistake could cost lives. One hesitation could shatter everything. She caught the eye of Private Chen, a young operative recently assigned to their unit. Nervous, eager, untested in real-world operations. Mara's chest tightened. The kid reminded her of herself years ago, ambitious, determined, but unprepared for the weight of consequence. She wanted to whisper advice, comfort, assurance, but the mission demanded silence. She could guide him, protect him, but only if she controlled herself first. Dalton gave a subtle nod. It was time. Mara lifted her rifle, aligning the scope. Her focus narrowed to a razor edge. The target vehicle, stationary now, was partially obscured by shadows and rocks. She traced the movements of those around it, noting patterns, reactions, vulnerabilities. Every second counted, every observation mattered. A faint vibration in the ground, an approaching vehicle off the main path. Mara tensed, calculating its trajectory, assessing risk. The target was visible now, stepping out to inspect the terrain. Her stomach churned. This was the moment. Precision, focus, clarity, yet her heart ached, a quiet reminder that action always carried consequence, that she could never erase what might follow. Memories surfaced again. A soldier she had failed to save, the quiet tears in the night afterward, the way regret settled in her chest like stone. She exhaled through her nose, forcing herself to separate past from present. Now was not the time for grief. Now was the time for action. Dalton's whisper cut through the tension, eyes sharp, "On my mark." Mara's finger hovered, body still but ready. She watched the team align, each member a testament to trust, skill, and shared survival. Her focus returned to the target. Calculations solidified. Angle, wind, distance. Breath steady. Heart controlled. Suddenly, a sound, a snap of rock, small but precise. Mara froze, scope tracing the movement, nothing visible yet. The convoy remained unaware. A potential threat, or merely the desert playing tricks. She exhaled slowly, a rhythm of calm through rising tension. She had learned to distinguish instinct from paranoia, to filter the noise from reality. The sun climbed further, making shadows harsher, visibility sharper. Mara adjusted her scope, marking the trajectory of the target's movement. Dalton gave the subtle nod. Mara exhaled, steadying herself. She was ready, not for heroics, not for recognition, not even for survival, but to do what needed to be done, to protect, to prevent loss, to uphold the promise she had made years ago to someone she loved. The team advanced, careful, precise, blending into the contours of the valley. Mara's eyes tracked every detail. The glint of sunlight on metal, the tension in bodies, the subtle shifts in posture that betrayed intent. Awareness was survival. Control was survival. Compassion sometimes was survival too, though it was invisible, unspoken, often unnoticed. She noticed the young soldier's subtle hesitations, tiny movements betraying fear. Mara's chest tightened. She understood. That fear was normal, necessary, but it couldn't govern actions. Discipline had to override instinct. She inhaled, letting years of training merge with intuition. She was not just acting for herself. She was acting for the team, for the innocents depending on them, and for the quiet promise she carried in her heart. And then the target moved again, adjusting his path, stepping closer to the edge of cover. Mara's pulse accelerated. Every calculation she had made mattered. Every observation, every second of patient stillness led to this. She exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of her heartbeat guide her focus. The decision was hers alone. Precision, resolve, compassion balanced with necessity. She steadied herself, felt the familiar weight of responsibility, the silent oath of protection, the echo of past failures. This was the crucible moment, the one that would define the outcome, the lives saved, the lives lost, the promise kept. A gust of wind lifted the dust at her feet. The convoy's movements paused, shadows stretching in unpredictable ways. Mara's eyes narrowed through the scope. Breath steady, hands calm, thoughts focused. Heart steady, though heavy with the weight of consequences yet unseen. And she realized as the moment stretched, as the sun rose higher, as the valley seemed suspended in time. The quiet sacrifices, the decisions made in shadows, the patience, the restraint, the silent courage, spoke louder than any gunfire. Sometimes, she thought, strength is not loud. It does not announce itself. It acts quietly, deliberately, and leaves behind a trace that only those who understand will ever see. And tonight, she would act. Why did the desert feel alive with whispers? Mara pressed herself closer to the rocky outcrop, eyes locked on the convoy as it crept through the narrow pass. Her heartbeat thrummed a steady rhythm, but beneath it lingered the old, familiar tension, the one that tightened her chest like steel bands. Years of missions had taught her the desert spoke in subtle ways. The sigh of wind over stone, the faint scuff of sand, the shift of shadows. Tonight, every whisper mattered. Dalton's hand brushed against her shoulder, subtle but grounding. No words were needed. The team advanced like shadows themselves, silent, coordinated, aware that a single misstep could shatter everything. Mara's fingers hovered near the trigger of her rifle, not from fear but from the weight of responsibility. She had carried this weight long enough to know it would never lift, no matter the outcome. Her eyes flicked to Private Chen again, the young operative struggling to steady his breath. He was competent, yes, but this was his first operation in hostile terrain under real conditions. Mara felt the old ache of empathy mixed with frustration. She wanted to reach out to steady him, to whisper guidance, but the mission demanded silence. She would protect him in action, not in words. The convoy paused at a choke point. Mara adjusted her scope, noting every detail, the positions of the guards, the glint of metal on the lead vehicle, the subtle shifts of weight that betrayed inexperience or fatigue. She held her breath, sensing the tension ripple through the team. Every eye was focused, every muscle coiled. Mara's mind raced through contingencies, mapping out every possible scenario in seconds. She remembered the last time she had hesitated. A child caught in the line of fire, a split-second decision, and the weight of it had followed her home for months. The memory twisted in her gut, a reminder that even the smallest delay could cost lives. She forced herself to exhale slowly, letting calm seep through the adrenaline. Patience, precision, resolve, the sniper's creed. A sudden noise, a small rock dislodging from a ledge above, made Mara flinch. Dalton's hand signaled reassurance. Nothing more than the desert's trickery, but the surge of adrenaline lingered, sharpening every sense. Dust floated in the air like 1,000 tiny ghosts. Mara's focus narrowed, isolating the target, isolating danger, isolating the moral calculations that never left her even in the quietest nights. The sun climbed higher, shadows shortening and revealing the valley in brutal clarity. Mara's training kicked in, every instinct tuned to survival, to observation, to action. She tracked the convoy, noting gaps in formation, lapses in vigilance, small opportunities for interception. Every second mattered, every miscalculation had consequences. And yet beneath it all there was fear. Not for herself, but for the team, for the innocents depending on them, and for the silent promise she had made years ago to someone she loved. That promise, her tether to humanity amidst violence, was a quiet fire in her chest, steady and unrelenting. Dalton whispered the signal and Mara adjusted her position, moving with the fluidity of someone who had rehearsed this dance countless times. The young operatives mirrored their movement, blending into the contours of the valley. Mara's eyes flicked to each of them, noting their tension, their fear, their determination. They were human, vulnerable, and their vulnerability made her vigilance sharper, more necessary. A shadow shifted near the lead vehicle. Mara's pulse quickened. The target was inspecting the terrain, unaware of the eyes trained on him from above. She exhaled slowly, aligning her scope. Calculations ran through her mind. Wind speed, distance, angle, timing. Every detail mattered. Mistakes were deadly. Her thoughts wandered briefly to her brother again. He had always believed she was invincible, though she had never been. She smiled faintly, a wry acknowledgement that strength was never about lack of fear. It was about acting despite it. That truth had carried her through countless nights of uncertainty, through long stretches of isolation and sacrifice. The convoy moved again, cautiously, each step precise yet hesitant. Mara's eyes tracked every footstep, every subtle shift in posture, every micro-expression that might reveal intent. Her hands steadied, body tense but controlled. She knew the mission was a test not just of skill, but of moral clarity, of restraint, of the quiet courage that demanded sacrifices unseen by the world. Suddenly, a figure broke away from the convoy. Mara's breath caught. This was unexpected. She watched as the man slipped behind a rock formation, possibly scouting ahead. Dalton's eyes flicked to hers, a silent query, a check. Mara signaled back. Precision now mattered more than ever. One wrong move and the entire mission could unravel. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, the quiet moments of doubt, the sleepless nights haunted by choices that could not be undone. Each mission left marks, both visible and invisible. The desert, the dust, the sun, they had all witnessed her journey. And tonight she realized those marks were preparation, not punishment. They had forged her into someone capable of acting when it mattered most. Mara adjusted her scope again, finger brushing the trigger. She noted the subtle hesitation in Private Chen's stance, the way another soldier's eyes darted nervously. These small details were as important as the target itself. Survival demanded observation, patience, empathy, even in the midst of violence. The convoy paused again. Mara held her breath. Time seemed suspended. She felt the weight of the team behind her, the civilians beyond the valley, and the promise she carried deep in her heart. Each heartbeat was a reminder. Action mattered, restraint mattered, sacrifice mattered. And sometimes the quiet choices, the ones made in stillness, in shadow, spoke louder than any gunfire. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the cost of duty. She had chosen this life, yes, but the consequences were not hers alone. Each mission demanded moral reckoning, demanded the courage to do what must be done while carrying the weight of those left behind. Mara exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of her heart guide her focus. Dalton signaled forward. Mara moved with the team, eyes never leaving the target. Every step, every glance, every breath was deliberate. The young operatives followed instinct, training, and the silent guidance she provided through example. Mara's mind mapped contingencies, accounted for variables, held the weight of unseen outcomes. And then it happened. A sudden jolt in the movement of the convoy, a misstep by one of the guards, a glint of metal in the sunlight. Mara's pulse quickened. She aligned her scope, calculating the moment with surgical precision. This was the intersection of preparation and opportunity. The moral calculus was hers alone, but she did not falter. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the familiar ache of human empathy, tempered by discipline. Fear mingled with resolve. Responsibility mingled with hope. And in that moment, Mara understood that the true measure of strength was not action alone, but the courage to bear the weight of choices, both quiet and visible. The convoy advanced again, moving into the open. Mara's focus sharpened. Each second counted. Each breath mattered. And she knew with absolute clarity that tonight her silent vigilance, her measured patience, and her quiet courage would speak louder than any gunfire. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest acts of bravery were invisible. They were not celebrated in medals or headlines. They existed in the quiet, in the waiting, in the sacrifice unseen. And tonight, that sacrifice would define everything. Why did the valley feel like it was holding its breath? Mara pressed herself flat against the ridge, eyes scanning the convoy below. Every detail mattered: the tilt of a head, the flash of sunlight off metal, the rhythm of footsteps across sand. The mission that had seemed straightforward in planning now twisted unpredictably beneath the sun, and Mara's pulse quickened with both anticipation and dread. Dalton's hand brushed hers briefly, a subtle reminder of the team's reliance on her focus. He didn't need to speak. The message was clear: one wrong move, one miscalculation, and this operation could end in chaos. Mara's finger hovered near the trigger of her rifle, but she didn't act yet. She had learned long ago that patience, control, and observation could save more lives than immediate action. The convoy shifted slightly, bringing the target vehicle closer to the natural choke point she had studied in satellite images. Mara's mind raced, calculating angles, wind, distance, exposure. Her hands were steady, but her chest ached with the familiar mix of fear and responsibility. She could feel the weight of every life depending on her: the team, the civilians, and someone far away who had trusted her promise. A subtle movement caught her eye. A young operative had shifted too far from cover. Mara's pulse spiked, and she whispered an almost inaudible warning gesture. The operative froze, realizing her silent instruction. Relief and pride mingled in her chest. These moments, quiet, unremarkable to outsiders, were often the difference between survival and tragedy. The sun climbed higher, burning away shadows and exposing every crevice. Mara adjusted her scope, noting the patterns of the guards, the slight hesitations, the micro-expressions that betrayed nerves. She could see the target's hand brush against the edge of the vehicle, signaling something, and her mind calculated potential responses. Every instinct, every training exercise, every mission she had survived until now converged into this singular moment. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her brother. She imagined him waiting at home, unaware of the calculus of life and death she navigated daily. She had promised him she would return, and that promise pulled tight like a cord through her chest. She had learned that promises made in love could weigh as heavily as duty, and tonight she would honor it. Dalton signaled. The team shifted in perfect coordination, advancing slowly, deliberately, using the terrain for cover. Mara mirrored their movements, body low, senses heightened. The convoy paused, as if sensing the change in the wind, the subtle tension in the earth. Mara's eyes traced every line of movement, every glance, every twitch of muscle. Time seemed suspended, each second stretching into eternity. Then a sudden snap, a rock dislodging from above. Mara's body tensed, every nerve alert. The target flinched slightly, but the convoy did not halt. The young operative beside her swallowed audibly, and Mara offered a brief, silent nod. Stay steady. Focus. Observation was survival. Mara's mind flicked to the past. Another mission, another life lost because she had hesitated, because she had doubted. The memory twisted in her stomach. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to separate past from present. Now was not the time for regret. Now was the time for precision, patience, and action guided by years of experience. The target moved again, stepping closer to the edge of cover. Mara adjusted her scope, calculating trajectory, wind, and the timing of the shot. Dalton's hand brushed hers, ready, synchronized, waiting for the signal. Her finger hovered near the trigger, body coiled like a spring. A flinch from the target's guard broke Mara's momentary meditation. Opportunity and danger collided. She inhaled, letting the rhythm of her heartbeat steady her hands. Every choice, every movement, every second was amplified in importance. One mistake could unravel months of planning, cost lives, and shatter the fragile balance of trust she carried with her. Mara's thoughts briefly touched the young soldiers flanking the target vehicle. Their inexperience was evident in subtle twitches, nervous glances, and the almost imperceptible hesitation in their steps. She felt a pang of protectiveness. This was her responsibility. Their safety, the success of the mission, and the silent promise she had made to someone far away were all intertwined in her awareness. The sun now blazed fully overhead, shadows stark and unforgiving. Mara's eyes flicked to Dalton again, and his subtle nod confirmed the approach. Precision, control, responsibility. These were the pillars that had carried her through every operation, every loss, every sleepless night haunted by choices she couldn't undo. Movement below. The target shifted, leaning slightly to peer over the edge. Mara's breath slowed, body still. Her mind ran calculations in fractions of seconds. Distance, wind, angle, exposure, timing, ethics, survival. She had learned that in the field, moral clarity and technical skill were inseparable. Hesitation had consequences. Action had consequences. Every decision carved a mark into the soul of those involved. Dalton's whisper broke the tension. On my mark. Mara's hands were steady, her eyes narrowed. The target's movements were predictable but not certain. One wrong calculation and everything could collapse. Her heartbeat, fierce yet disciplined, guided her focus. She remembered the silent nights of training, the sacrifices, the quiet victories no one saw. Everything had led to this point. A flinch from a guard, a brief exposure. Mara exhaled softly, letting her instincts merge with her training. Her body was ready. Her mind was precise. Her heart, though heavy with the weight of consequence, was determined. She could feel the threads of connection to her team, to the innocent lives depending on them, to the promise she had carried for years, binding her to the moment. The decision came, not with fanfare but with quiet inevitability. Mara acted, eyes sharp, hands steady. Every breath, every heartbeat, every fraction of motion was calculated and purposeful. The world seemed to narrow to a single point, the intersection of skill, morality, and consequence. The target's vehicle shifted again. Mara exhaled slowly, letting the tension coalesce into control. She would act decisively, deliberately. There was no room for error. There was no room for hesitation. Only action, precise, measured, necessary. And as the team moved, shadows flickering across the valley, Mara realized again the truth she had learned countless times. Heroism is quiet. Courage is measured. Sacrifice is often invisible. The weight of responsibility, the burden of choices, and the silent endurance of fear spoke louder than any gunfire ever could. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the faint echo of past missions, of lives saved and lost, of promises kept and broken. They strengthened her resolve. They reminded her that action carried meaning, not for recognition, not for glory, but for the protection of those who could not protect themselves. The sun's glare reflected off a distant ridge. Mara's finger remained poised, her eyes locked on the convoy. Every second mattered, every breath counted, and she understood fully and profoundly that her sacrifice, her vigilance, and her quiet courage would speak in ways the world might never see. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest victories are the ones no one witnesses. They exist in the silence, in the restraint, in the choices made when no one is looking. And tonight, her choice would define everything. Why did the ground seem to hum beneath her boots? Mara crouched low behind the ridge, eyes glued to the convoy winding through the narrow pass below. Every sound, rustling sand, shifting rocks, faint whispers of wind, was amplified in the stillness. The valley seemed alive, aware, as if it held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Mara's chest tightened, not with fear of her own death, but with the weight of responsibility pressing down, reminding her that every heartbeat mattered. Dalton's hand brushed her subtly, a silent acknowledgement of trust. No words were necessary, the message was clear. One misstep and the lives she carried on her conscience could be lost. Mara adjusted her rifle, finger grazing the trigger, her mind calculating angles, trajectories, wind drift, and the faint irregularities in the terrain. She could feel the invisible pulse of the valley beneath her feet, a rhythm that warned of danger, guided her focus, and tethered her to the team behind her. The convoy halted near a natural choke point, where rocks formed jagged silhouettes against the desert sun. Mara exhaled slowly, letting her training merge with instinct. Every movement of the target, every micro-expression of the guards, was a thread in a complex web she needed to navigate. Hesitation could shatter the delicate balance. Precision would save lives. She had carried the cost of indecision before. She would not bear it again. Her thoughts wandered briefly to her brother. The promise she had made years ago tugged at her chest, a tether to humanity amidst the chaos. She imagined him at home, unaware of the moral calculus she carried, unaware of the sleepless nights haunted by choices that had no perfect resolution. She forced the thought away, letting it fuel her resolve instead of her doubt. The team advanced silently, each operative moving like a shadow through the valley. Mara mirrored their motion, body low, eyes scanning every detail, the tilt of a head, the pattern of footsteps, the slightest glint of metal. Observation was survival, precision was survival. Empathy, though quiet, was survival too. The young soldiers flanking the target shifted nervously and Mara's chest tightened. They were inexperienced, untested, yet brave. Their vulnerability reminded her of herself years ago, trembling in a training tent under the pounding rain, promising she could endure. The sun climbed higher, turning the valley floor into a harsh arena of light and shadow. Mara adjusted her scope, noting every potential line of fire, every chance of exposure, every detail that could tip the scales of life and death. Dalton's whisper signaled a subtle shift. Mara responded with fluidity, moving into position, body coiled and ready. Time slowed, seconds stretched into eternity. Then the unexpected, a faint scuff of movement from above the ridge. Mara's pulse spiked. She froze, eyes scanning the source. A lone scout from the convoy had broken formation, possibly seeking cover or reconnoitering ahead. Dalton's glance confirmed her suspicion. The moment demanded focus, patience, and decisive action. Mara's hands steadied. Every second of hesitation now could carry consequences beyond imagination. She remembered another night years ago when hesitation had cost a life. The memory twisted her gut, a silent ghost. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. This mission would not carry that regret. Not tonight, not under her watch. She was not fighting for recognition, nor for medals. She was fighting for lives dependent on her, for the promise she had made, for the quiet dignity of restraint. The target's vehicle edged into open terrain. Mara's breath slowed, heart synchronized with the rhythm of focus. Her finger hovered near the trigger, body poised, mind razor-sharp. The young operative beside her trembled slightly. Mara's gaze flicked briefly, discipline, control, observation. A subtle nod reassured him without breaking silence. He would live because she held the balance. Time fractured into fractions of a second. Movement below, the target stepping into the sunlight, exposed yet unaware. Mara's mind calculated trajectory, wind, gravity, timing. Dalton's hand brushed hers once more. On my mark, precision, resolve, discipline. The sniper's creed, honed through years of sacrifice and silent endurance. Suddenly, a noise, a rock tumbling down a slope, shattered the tension. Mara's body tensed, instinct sharpening. The guard flinched, but the target remained unaware. The young operative stiffened. Mara exhaled, letting focus wash over the adrenaline. Observation, patience, action only when necessary. She had learned the cost of rashness. It had haunted her in quiet moments in the dead of night. She would not repeat that mistake. The sun now blazed overhead, unforgiving. Shadows carved harsh lines across the valley floor, revealing subtle movements and concealing others. Mara adjusted her scope, tracing the target's subtle gestures, the positioning of guards, the faint rhythm of their breaths. Every detail mattered. One miscalculation could tip the balance, shatter lives, destroy the delicate choreography they had prepared. Her thoughts flicked to the promise she had made to someone far away, a tether to humanity that kept her anchored amid the violence. The memory of that vow, whispered years ago, pulsed in her chest. She would keep it no matter the cost. The team, the innocent lives depending on them, and that promise all converged in this single, excruciatingly tense moment. Dalton signaled forward. Mara mirrored the motion, coiled and ready. The target moved again, leaning slightly, exposing himself. Mara exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of her heartbeat guide her hands. Calculation, control, resolve, action. She could feel the invisible threads linking her to everyone and everything in that valley, threads of responsibility, threads of duty, threads of quiet courage. The first shot echoed, a subtle, precise action, controlled and deliberate. Mara felt the familiar weight lift slightly, replaced by another, the burden of consequence. The target was neutralized, but the operation was not over. The valley remained alive with danger. The team pressed forward, shadows flickering across the rocks, every movement deliberate. Mara's eyes scanned for threats, for mistakes, for hidden variables. A young soldier stumbled, sand slipping underfoot. Mara's hand shot out, steadying him silently. The lesson was clear. Vigilance saved more than bullets. Empathy, precision, and quiet courage, these were weapons as lethal as any rifle. The team advanced through the valley, each step measured, each breath synchronized. Mara's thoughts flicked to her brother again. The promise she had made, the vow to return, gave her both focus and fear. Survival was never guaranteed. She had learned that the hard way, with the quiet ache of regret lingering in sleepless nights. Tonight, she would not let history repeat itself. The convoy beyond the valley began to move again, unaware of the precision that had struck them. Mara's finger hovered, body ready, mind clear. Every second mattered, every breath counted. The valley hummed beneath her feet, alive, waiting, testing. She exhaled slowly, letting clarity settle over her. The mission was far from over, but for now, the first act of sacrifice had been completed. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest battles were not fought in gunfire, but in restraint, in quiet endurance, in the moral clarity to act when the world demanded it. And tonight, that clarity, that courage, that silent sacrifice would define everything. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? Mara crouched behind the ridge, eyes scanning the valley that had been her battlefield for hours. The air was thick with dust and heat, every grain a reminder of the unseen weight pressing against her chest. The team had advanced beyond the convoy, neutralizing the immediate threat, but danger still lurked in the shadows, in the narrow gullies, in the uncertain horizon. Mara's heart thumped like a drumbeat, steady yet tense, each beat a reminder that even victory demanded vigilance. Dalton's subtle gestures guided the team forward. Mara mirrored his motions, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. The young operatives flanking her mirrored the same tension, inexperienced but resolute. She could see their fear, the way their hands trembled subtly on weapons, the way their eyes darted to every shifting shadow. Mara felt the familiar ache of responsibility. They were counting on her to not just act, but to see what they could not, to bear the weight of unseen consequences. The sun beat down, relentless and unyielding. Shadows shortened and stretched unpredictably across the valley floor, carving illusions that tested perception. Mara adjusted her scope, eyes narrowing as she tracked movement in the distance. A figure detached itself from the convoy, moving cautiously but deliberately. Mara's pulse quickened. Something about the movement was off. She had learned to trust instinct refined by experience. This was not a scout. It was something else, something dangerous. Her thoughts flicked briefly to her brother. The promise she had made to him years ago reverberated in her chest. She had told him she would return, but she knew now that promises were never simple. They were burdens, tethered to duty and morality, and carried silently in the moments no one witnessed. Her mind replayed countless nights of restlessness, the memories of missions gone wrong, of lives lost under her watch, of the quiet guilt that refused to fade. Mara signaled Dalton, pointing subtly toward the figure. He understood instantly. The team froze, blending into the contours of the terrain. Observation first, patience first, action only when necessary. Mara's hands hovered near her rifle, steady, controlled, yet ready to act with lethal precision. Every second stretched, every heartbeat measured against consequences. The figure moved again, closer now to the ridge, unknowingly approaching Mara's line of sight. She adjusted her breathing, slowing it deliberately, feeling the rhythm of the valley beneath her feet. The weight of responsibility pressed down. She was not just observing, she was guiding, protecting, deciding. Every life in the valley, every innocent, every young soldier, was tethered to her judgment. Suddenly, a sharp noise, a pebble tumbling down a slope, made the young operative beside her flinch. Mara shot him a brief, calming glance. Focus, discipline, observation. Fear was natural, but it could not dictate action. She thought about the countless nights she had spent replaying errors in her mind, the haunting memory of someone she could not save because of hesitation. She would not repeat that mistake. Not here, not now. The sun's glare reflected off the distant rocks. Mara adjusted her scope, calculating wind, distance, trajectory, timing. Dalton's hand brushed against her shoulder, a signal to maintain composure, a silent reminder that the team's lives depended on her. The figure moved into a narrow opening between boulders, partially exposed, unaware that Mara's eyes were locked on every movement. Her mind flicked back to the team behind her. Private Chen, nervous but brave, flanked the ridge, eyes wide, hands tight on his rifle. Mara felt a surge of protectiveness, tempered by the knowledge that action now could save them, or endanger them. Her finger hovered near the trigger, but her mind ran contingency after contingency. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat mattered. And then she noticed it, another movement, subtle, almost invisible. A glint of metal in the sunlight, the faintest shadow shifting across the rocks. Mara's stomach tightened. It wasn't just the figure, they were not alone. A trap, an ambush. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins, sharpening every sense. The valley, once still, now thrummed with danger. She exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of her heartbeat guide her focus. Dalton signaled forward, and Mara led the team carefully, moving like shadows through the terrain, eyes scanning, senses alert. Every decision, every small adjustment could tip the balance between survival and disaster. The sun climbed higher, casting stark light across the valley, exposing every detail. Mara noticed subtle changes in the team's stance, micro-expressions of fear, determination, and trust. She felt the old ache of empathy mixed with resolve. They were inexperienced, yet brave, vulnerable, yet capable. Their lives rested in her judgment. She would not falter. The figure ahead reached the narrow pass. Mara adjusted her scope, fingers steady. She calculated trajectory, wind, distance, timing. Every variable mattered. Dalton's hand brushed hers once more, a silent confirmation. Observation, patience, action. And then chaos. A sudden flare of movement from the shadows. Mara's senses screamed. The team reacted instinctively, rifles raised, bodies coiled. Mara exhaled, heart pounding, and made the choice that would define the moment. Precision, discipline, courage. Her action was deliberate, controlled, necessary. The threat was neutralized, but the valley remained tense, alive, unpredictable. The young operative beside her trembled, and Mara placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Focus, patience, observation. The lesson was not lost. Survival required more than skill. It required restraint, awareness, empathy. She felt the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in her chest. Each life saved, each choice made, carved invisible lines across her conscience. Mara's thoughts returned to her brother, to the promise she had carried silently through every mission. She would return, she would honor it. Yet she knew that every choice left a mark, visible or not. Some sacrifices were immediate, others unfolded quietly, threading through the days and nights to come. She had learned to accept that, to bear it, to act anyway. The sun reached its peak, harsh and unrelenting. Shadows shrank, leaving no cover. Mara scanned the terrain, observing the aftermath of their actions. The convoy was contained, the immediate threats neutralized, but the valley still hummed with tension and the team remained coiled, ready for any shift, any new danger. Mara exhaled slowly, letting a fraction of relief wash over her. She noticed the young soldiers adjusting, gaining confidence under her quiet guidance. Her chest tightened with a mix of pride and sorrow. She had seen their fear, their vulnerability, and she had protected them, not just with skill, but with presence, vigilance, and moral clarity. That was her strength. That was her sacrifice. Silent, unseen, yet decisive. And as the team moved forward, shadows flickering across the rocks, Mara understood once more the truth she had lived. Heroism is quiet. Courage is measured. Sacrifice is often invisible. The weight of responsibility, the burden of choice, and the endurance of fear spoke louder than any gunfire. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest acts of bravery are not witnessed. They exist in the quiet decisions, the moments of restraint, the moral clarity to act when the world demands it. Tonight, her sacrifice had defined everything, shaping the outcome, preserving lives, and honoring the promise she carried silently in her heart. Why did the night feel heavier than any battlefield she had ever known? Mara stood at the ridge, eyes tracing the fatting outline of the valley below. The convoy had been neutralized. The immediate threats had been contained. Yet the silence that stretched across the landscape was thicker, denser than any gunfire, any explosion. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the chest, that demanded reflection, that carried the weight of lives saved and lost in equal measure. Dalton approached, his shadow long in the setting sun. He didn't speak. Words would have been useless. The understanding between them, the shared history of missions, sacrifices, and near misses, was enough. Mara exhaled slowly, feeling the exhaustion settle into her muscles, but also the satisfaction that the operation had succeeded without unnecessary loss. She had made the hard choices, the precise decisions, and borne the weight of consequence with quiet resolve. Her thoughts flicked to the young operatives beside her. Private Chen and the others were sprawled across the rocky terrain, faces streaked with dust and sweat, eyes wide with disbelief and tentative relief. Mara allowed herself a moment of pride. They had survived because she had led them, because she had protected them, because she had acted with both courage and restraint. Yet pride was fleeting. The weight of responsibility remained. She remembered her brother again, the promise she had carried through each mission. She had told him she would return. She had made that promise years ago, and it had guided her through countless nights of fear, doubt, and moral reckoning. Tonight she had honored it, not through spectacle, not through recognition, but through action, vigilance, and silent sacrifice. A faint breeze swept through the valley, lifting dust into the air. Mara's eyes traced the edges of the convoy below, noting the stillness that now filled the space once charged with danger. Every life spared, every decision made in restraint, every careful calculation had contributed to this moment. She realized once again that strength was not measured in gunfire or explosions. It was measured in patience, in moral clarity, in the courage to act when the stakes were highest. Dalton signaled toward the extraction point, and Mara nodded. The team moved in unison, shadows flickering in the twilight, every step deliberate, every glance precise. The young operatives mirrored their movements, learning through observation, absorbing lessons of discipline, courage, and responsibility. Mara felt the quiet satisfaction of mentorship, tempered by the knowledge that the choices she made would ripple far beyond this mission. The sun sank lower, casting long, golden shadows across the rocks. Mara paused, allowing herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought of every mission that had come before, every life lost, every choice that had haunted her. And she thought of the invisible sacrifices, the ones that no medal could honor, the ones that no history would record. Those sacrifices defined her, shaped her, and had guided her through this valley of uncertainty. A distant rumble broke the silence, the sound of the extraction helicopter approaching. Mara's chest tightened with anticipation and relief. The mission was over, but the journey home was just beginning. She looked at the team, at the young operatives whose trust and safety had been in her hands, and felt a profound sense of responsibility. They had survived, but the memory of this night, the weight of choices made, would remain with them as it would with her. As the helicopter descended, dust swirling around its landing zone, Mara took a moment to breathe, to let the stillness settle, to acknowledge the invisible burden of duty she carried. She thought of her brother again, imagining him waiting at home, unaware of the precise calculus that had ensured her return. She had kept her promise, not through bravado or spectacle, but through courage, vigilance, and quiet sacrifice. The team climbed aboard the helicopter, each operative silent, exhausted, but alive. Mara lingered for a moment, her eyes tracing the valley one last time. She felt the weight of the night pressing against her, but also the clarity that came from knowing she had acted with integrity, with skill, and with heart. The valley had witnessed her choices, her endurance, and her sacrifice, even if no one else would. The rotor blades lifted the helicopter into the sky, carrying the team away from the valley, away from danger and toward safety. Mara exhaled, letting tension release from her muscles. She felt a quiet sense of closure, tempered by the knowledge that each mission left marks, visible and invisible, immediate and lingering. The cost of duty was never fully erased, but it could be honored through action, vigilance, and moral clarity. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Mara allowed herself a rare smile. She had faced the valley, faced the threats, faced the weight of responsibility, and emerged intact. Her team had survived. The innocent had been protected, and the promise she had carried through countless nights of uncertainty and fear had been fulfilled. She thought of the quiet acts that defined her: restraint, observation, patience, courage, and sacrifice. They were invisible, often unnoticed, but they spoke louder than gunfire, louder than accolades, louder than anything the world could offer. Mara understood fully and profoundly that this was the essence of strength. Dalton glanced at her, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. No words were necessary. The valley, the mission, the choices made in shadow and stillness, all spoke for themselves. Mara exhaled slowly, letting the rotor wash of the helicopter carry her toward home, toward the promise kept, toward the quiet dignity of her actions. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And as the helicopter disappeared into the horizon, Mara closed her eyes for the first time that night, letting the quiet settle around her. The valley below remained silent, holding the echoes of gunfire, tension, fear, and courage. Her sacrifices, her vigilance, her choices, they were imprinted there, permanent, uncelebrated, and profoundly human. The wind stirred the dust one last time, and Mara felt the invisible weight lift, just enough to allow herself a sense of quiet peace. She had acted when it mattered most. She had endured. She had sacrificed. And she would carry these lessons, these scars, these truths quietly always. The night stretched out, vast and unbroken, and Mara knew that her story, like the stories of countless others, was not about heroics or glory. It was about endurance, moral clarity, quiet sacrifice, and the unspoken acts that shape lives in ways the world may never witness. And in that vast silence, Mara understood the deepest truth she had learned. Courage is measured not by the noise it makes, but by the lives it preserves, the promises it honors, and the dignity it carries, quietly, without fanfare, without recognition, and always with heart.